Okay, so it's funny because I've had this discussion with friends and family who are in similar positions. So some aspects of it seem common to all parents, really. You know, you worry about being there for your children. You worry that something might take away your ability to provide for them, or all those stereotypical life landmarks, walking them down the aisle, all this kind of thing. Will you be there? But I guess that's the same for everyone. But I'll give you a concrete example that affects us at the moment. My daughter's 8 years old. And so obviously she's in school. And at the moment, my wife has to take her to school and collect her from school. And this is a combination of obviously the coronavirus situation at the moment. So you're trying to avoid situations where I'd be around crowds and that kind of thing. But there's also, it's caused a fair amount of damage to my joints. So my knees, I've got osteoarthritis in both knees. And I've also got an issue with the lower back. So standing for prolonged periods is painful in terms of my back. Walking isn't painful to my back, but it's obviously extremely painful for my knees. So it's like, that's a burden that's put on my wife that under normal circumstances, you'd say we should share.
Yeah.
And this is just one of the things. There's also the fact that I had to be fortunate enough to find an employer who, even before lockdown and so on, would allow me to work from home a lot, doing a lot of telecommuting, because I found that going to work caused problems. You catch all kinds of things when you're around lots of people, and those infections have more ramifications for us than for 80-90% of the population. So you catch it, gets more serious, you have a crisis, boom, you're in hospital, next thing, so it's complicated. It would be easier to try and look for an aspect of life that it doesn't affect, and I can't think of any, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good evening, Tunde.
Evening.
Yes. I have to say, my brother, you look fantastic for your age, for your challenges in life. You are just glowing. You look very well.
Don't tell him that.
Just want to let you know. Before you had children, did you ever consider whether or not you should go ahead because you have sickle cell?
That's a very good question. And yes, I did. In fact, if I'm honest, I had kind of resigned myself to the idea that I wouldn't have children. So I was fortunate enough. I met my wife in terms of meeting her, I met her when I was 22 or so. So we were at university together, and I found out very early on, because she coincidentally was a blood donor. So she is AA as opposed to AS or anything. And all of a sudden it became a possibility to have children, because I hadn't liked the idea of, if you meet Miss Right and then you're like, well, I can't marry you because you've got the wrong genotype. So fortunately that wasn't an issue. And it was just more a question of persuading her around to the idea that maybe children were good. So yeah, so I was lucky in that sense. And then also, I guess the other thing, if I'm honest, on the, I don't know what to call it, on the heavier side, you also want to make sure, like, you're with somebody that if, God forbid, something does happen, is this someone who could raise a child by themselves? You see what I mean? Because you can't just have the child and then like, oh, it's my time to go, and then you're gone and you leave, So I'm lucky that she's a woman who's both intelligent and strong enough to cope and raise a child. I'm not planning on going anywhere. I'm not running off or anything, but unfortunately, it's something we have to think about a bit more seriously than most people.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, because we're both in the same boat, both being parents and having sickle cell,
Yeah.
and had obviously I suppose some of the same thoughts. And having said that, one of them would be because I know it's something that I worry about, uh, worried about before I had children. So did you ever worry that one, you might pass it on, sickle cell on to them?
Mm.
What would be the effect on their lives? Because I know it's something that has, I would say, consumed me,
Mm.
but taking up a lot of my time thinking about that, and comes with a fair amount of guilt.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Yes. Listen, the truth is, if my wife Nicola had been AS, I would have just had the snip. To be honest, there's no two ways about it. I could not, because I mean, we know how rough this condition can be.
yeah,
Do you see what I mean? And the idea that, I excuse my parents because at that time, when I was born, knowledge about it was very limited, and they weren't doing genetic counseling or any of those things on any sort of widespread basis. People just had the kids, and then, oh no, my child has sickle cell or whatever.
yeah,
We know better.
yeah,
Do you see what I
exactly.
mean?
And I said
Yes.
that
So,
piece.
yeah, so I've been lucky enough to have that knowledge. There's no way. And I was also relatively privileged in the sense of the circumstances my parents raised me in, the education that they were able to give me, and all of those things. And so I would have felt as though if I had a child with sickle cell, despite all those things, it would be almost like throwing those things away,
Yeah, both in
ignoring
a
everything.
situation where we know
So,
people, we both know people that have
yes,
made those choices, and
yes,
it's for them to live with. But and
yeah,
like you, I was adamant that I wasn't going to have children, get married or be with someone who had sickle cell or had sickle cell in their family or thalassemia, because
yeah,
like you said, I
Yeah.
know what my life has been like. I know
yeah,
what it's done to us, and I see what it does to others. And I think at some point in your life, your child is going to say, or children are going to say, ask why
mm,
have I got this, and why is this doing this to me? And you're going to have to then explain that, okay, it's something you've got because I passed it on to you,
Yeah.
and I
yes,
knew what the outcome would be, but I decided. Do you mean? And like I said,
yeah,
that I still feel guilty of the fact that my children and grandchildren have traits,
Okay.
yes, it's,
and the fact that you spend an inordinate amount of time in hospital
yes.
constantly, and I feel bad for that every single day.
Yes. And I know, because this is a conversation I'd had with my mother a couple of times before she passed. Well, actually, I shouldn't say it that way because it makes it sound as though it was close to in time, but conversation that I had with her. And this thing used to eat away at her.
Mm.
She would see me having a crisis. And I could say, in all honesty, it also affected our relationship because although she didn't want to, and she was a loving mother, I'm not trying to say she wasn't, but then she would try to almost avoid seeing me in that state. And
Yeah,
of course, that's the time when you need the most support.
Yeah.
But it's like she couldn't bear seeing this and she blamed herself. I don't feel she should have because, like I said, we have a lot more knowledge now. And also, my parents were Nigerian, and in it was unthinkable. They'd have endured a lot of social and whatever pressure to have children in a way that I definitely didn't. And so with all those things, with that lack of knowledge, with this social pressure and so on, I mean, it was just like get married, have children, and they were young. My mom was 24 when I was born.
Mm.
This is something that you just did and you didn't really give it any thought. And if you didn't do it, then it's like you were, especially for women, it's like you were a bad woman,
Mm.
a bad wife. So she shouldn't have blamed herself, but she still did. So how much more me with my added advantages than doing the same thing? Now, it sounds very judgmental because, as you said, we both know people who have sickle cell and who've had children. with sickle cell, and their circumstances are different from mine. You know, and so I'm not judging them within their circumstances. I'm saying, given mine, it wouldn't have made sense for me to do it.
Yeah,
I'll definitely say that. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise, my parents didn't know. I found out when I was 4, and I've always felt a burden to my mum, but she's been my rock. And I can see she did blame herself. And I've said to her many times, you didn't know, it's not your fault. And I can see the impact having sickle cell has had on my whole family, especially my mum. Her life has been in a way dedicated to help caring for me at many times and at many stages of my life. How do you think your health and having sickle cell has impacted your friends and family?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'll tell you this, right? There's one aspect that I know she'll find embarrassing if she ever watches this, but when I met my wife, I knew she always scoffs and, you know, thinks that Nigerians call it toasting, that I'm just toasting, you know, it's like I'm trying to, but the truth is, from when we started dating, I knew, you know what I mean? And I told her I knew, and she doubted me, but it was like a thing of, you know, there was not, I'd never met anyone else who was for me the way that she was. And I say this to emphasize the fact that I gave serious thought to not marrying her, because I felt as though if I did, it would be a burden to her, and the rest of her life would be blighted by being with me.
Same here.
Where was your wife? Is she also Nigerian?
No, so her mum's from Barbados and her dad's from Trinidad.
Okay.
Yeah, so there wasn't any of that.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Yeah. So she has, I feel as though definitely there's an extra effort that she's had to put in, you know, with our daughter. Even like when we started dating, my health was a lot worse than it is now. So I was in and out of hospital on the regular, and it's like, how many people would put up with that? You know, and there's no way her, you know, her friends or family would have wanted her to, you know, to go through all those things, because not just the physical effort of doing it, carrying herself out to the hospital and back and so on, bringing me stuff, doing my laundry, doing all these things while I was in there, but also the emotional cost.
Yeah, so I knew, you know, Marie was special for me because she was the first person I dated that actually visited me in hospital.
Okay, you see.
So, and yeah, see, and like you, I would like to say we didn't get on when we first met because we used to work together. But when we did, she, like you said, I knew, and everybody said, "How could you?" And I said, "I just knew."
Yeah.
And I just knew she was there. And then like her visiting me in hospital, I was like, okay, yeah, see, I was right.
Yeah.
That was like, because you mean it's like up until that point, no one had ever even batted an eyebrow. I thought that, oh yeah, he's in hospital for a few weeks. Let me go see him. And she was the first one there, like the first day, and I was like, okay, yeah, you know. And my friend said, like, you know, don't mess this up.
Yeah, no,
it's true. Going back to like, you know, like when, because when we first met, we both used, like, we were in hospital an awful lot, and we spent like a ridiculous amount of time in there. So how going back then, how often did you have transfusions then?
Okay, so funny enough, the time when I had regular transfusions, because I've had them a lot since then, but having them regularly was shortly before I met you, funnily enough.
Okay.
And then I stopped because basically I was too undisciplined to keep up with the iron chelation regime. And it was a case of, like, I was very skinny then, okay, because I'm 6'4", and back then I was maybe I wasn't even 12 stone at any rate. Okay. You know, I mean, I'm skinny now, but now I'm 14 stone. So you can imagine what, well, you already know what I was like back then.
Yeah.
So I had no body fat, and doing the injections in my supposed belly fat, there wasn't any. And it was horrible. and I'd get these terrible, almost like sores from it, because there wasn't even enough space for the fluid to be stored subcutaneously. So it was just either going straight into my muscle, or it was causing these horrible, I don't know what's called them, on my stomach. And I just, eventually I told them, you know what, I can't keep doing this. And so since then, I've had transfusions when I've been seriously ill. So it's been more of an acute crisis thing. And then, you know, serious infections, this, that, and the other. And then I've had them. So I'm still reliant on them, but just in a different way. Because there are several times, as I can think of offhand, that if I hadn't had them, literally I would have died. It's not like oh, I felt as though I would have. No, I would have. Yeah. So they saved my life in the same way. It's just that it was more an application at specific times rather than a regular thing.
What about you, Davina?
Yeah, likewise. I don't have regular transfusions. I did choose to come off the program because I have a transplant, and because my transplant was failing. I knew the more transfusions I had, the more antibodies I would build up, making it harder to have a match. My brother donated to me in 2017 Sunday, so it finally it ended up rejecting this year. So I'm back on dialysis at the moment.
Okay.
So yeah, I do have to have blood transfusions now and then. I try to limit them, but because your kidneys control your red blood cells, I'm not producing many. I need top-ups. And that's just to stop me from sickling. My last crisis was in June, and I think I had to have like 8 units just because it was such a bad crisis. And as I said, so it's that scare of having them and then not being able to get a transplant because of antibodies. But yeah, it makes me as well think of the people that do donate blood and the Black community that do. So someone that's had them, did you ever consider who was donating your blood? And how do you feel towards it?
Listen, if anyone who listens to this, if you donated blood, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because, look, my story would have ended when I was 19. Literally, that would have been, you know, I had pneumonia. I was messed up. That was kind of it for me if I hadn't been able to have those transfusions then. And then when I was at uni, like I said, my wife gave blood. I have a very, very close friend who was at the same uni with us. She gave blood as well. I have a guy who was a groomsman at my wedding, you know, so he's one of my best friends. He's a regular blood donor as well. And it's just, so I have people close to me who did this. And it wasn't even because of me, because they knew somebody who, you know, it might one day save my life. It was just, I think, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, but you know, that sense of generosity of spirit, that you do something for someone that is so important and you don't even know that person. So this is how I think about them, because, you know, thank you. And there aren't enough people like you. If there were more people like that, the world would be a better place, because who does things with no hope of gain? You don't gain anything. And it's kind of an unpleasant process as well. And yet you do it. And then the people who do it are the ones who tend to do it more. So yeah, I think you can tell I've thought about them a bit, you know.
Regular donors. I mean, Calvin, yourself, you have it how often is it? Every 6 weeks?
3-4 weeks.
3-4 weeks, so basically every month.
Yeah, and so and I have
units?
10. So I have 10 now, which even though it sounds like a lot, it's cut down from, because I have it automated, so on the machine. And it, like I said, it's something that over the years, if I'm being honest, when I was much younger, and because, you know, you're going in that hospital, and I used to have like transfusions every week. So I used to have 5 units a week. And for most of my life, that was like the case. And because you're having so much problems, you don't almost sometimes have time to think about the process of what's keeping you alive. Tunde, you know, where we've had situations where we've been incredibly unwell, And even to the point of where it's a strange conversation where someone says to you, do you want to go to a nursing home? And you see a priest come and talk to you. And that you have, and that it's a weird conversation you're having with some, and then you're having blood and they're trying to get enough blood, and then it's at that time you think how important it is, but you don't think about then who it's coming from in that respect. You know how important it is because you're thinking, this thing is literally, like Tony said, keeping me alive. And it's a strange experience to have no control over whether you are alive, if that makes sense. You get up at a point and you feel, but when you get to the point where you're so unwell, it's like, okay, if I take the next breath, that isn't actually up to me anymore because I've lost that much control of my body. So thinking about who was donating, it was really important. And the fact that, like I said, where the ethnicity, I never thought about it then. And once I learned more, began to think about it. But like I said, yeah, I'm still here. I have children and grandchildren, which is something that I never thought I'd have. And the fact that I am still here, because you get used to say, a doctor saying to you, you're going to live to this age. And every time you tick one off, it's like, yeah, one for me. And like I said, I admire you, Davina, because the decision, the fact that, where you need blood, and then the dialysis, and the fact that organ failure is beyond words. It is, and I don't understand why more in our community don't see how important that is.
Yeah, the conversation of blood donation is a start. It's when we get onto the conversation of remain not opting out.
Yeah.
And the myths behind that. I mean, there's a whole lot. We won't go into it with how Black people view the government and the trust in the health system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes. I had a sorry. Yeah. No. I don't know if it was something you had wanted to get into in that sense, because I had a friend who was doing research into it for their doctorate, and at that point in time, I was, they were discussing a lot of this stuff with me, and that it was actually something I was then reading into. And like I said, I don't know if it's something you want to discuss in any detail, but yeah, you see.
I think we'll save that for another show, definitely. I mean, it's kind of breaking down the myths on why Black people do not donate. So it would be a good show for people to understand what they're scared of and why, how they would be helping us. So breaking down the myths would be good.
Because it didn't come out of nothing. I mean, it's not help. See, it sounds judgmental if I say it's not helpful, but I don't feel it's helpful. But at the same time, it didn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
And there were these historical factors that fed into it. And so I can understand it, but at the same time, I wish it weren't so. If that makes sense.
So as people as a group of people who have blood and who rely on blood and organ donation, do you want to explain to people why better ethnically matched blood and organs matter for people who have regular transfusions and who need regular treatment, as compared to people who have elective surgery and things like that, or RTA, road traffic accidents? Why it's important for it to be type specific, race specific? Start with you, Davina.
It's very important just because of the I think you know more on it than me, but the RO types that we have.
Yeah.
So someone like me who's B positive and my blood tissue group, it all goes by that. I think you'll be better off probably explaining how it comes down to the whole science behind it.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said?
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, the way it was explained to me was, as you said, there are certain, basically, the closer someone is related to you, then the more likely they are to be compatible in various ways. And the more transfusions you have, is like the closer the person needs to be to you in that sense genetically, in order for you not to have whichever kind of reactions. And so there are all kinds of, I don't know, proteins and other elements within our blood that cause reactions in other people, and those reactions are minimized. But as to the specifics, you know, what they're called and how exactly the process works, yeah, I know you know a lot more about it than me. I just know that surface level
Well, it's more the fact that I want people to understand the importance, like Davina said, for them to come back, not just to donate once and think, oh, that's okay. Because what people don't understand is that when we have blood, every time we have to have blood, we have to be cross-matched prior to having blood to see what antibodies we built up. And every time you have donor blood, you build up antibodies from that donor with your own, and you make new antibodies. So you have to be cross-matched. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, you're A, we're just going to match you. You have to, because otherwise, if you have a reaction to blood, it can be very severe, and it's most severe, it can kill you or prevent you from having transfusions again if you build up too many antibodies. So it's really important that people, why it's important that ethnically matched blood is so important, because people have to be, like you said, as close to possible, perfect match as possible. It has to be a 99.999% match every time. And so they test our blood, they see what antibodies we've got compared to the donor blood, and then we're allowed to have an exchange or an organ. And people don't realize, and which is why I think it's vitally important that, especially from our communities, that they understand that more, and they see why it's so important for them to come forward and to not only donate, but to be regular donors and to be willing. And like Davina says, where the law and the license changing, to not opt out of that, to not think, oh, I should tick that box. Why? Because, you know, you're helping someone. So people need to understand how vitally important that part of it is.
That's true. But then how, well, because I know you're more involved with that. So how do you get people to know? And I'm genuinely curious, because I know lots of the time it's not even that people are, you know, they're not like trying to be cruel or anything like that. People are busy.
Yeah.
They're hard work, there's a lot of stress, there's family this, there's that, there's the other. So people are a bit disengaged and they don't know. And it's how do you increase awareness? And it may be a conversation we have off this, because truly that is something I would like to contribute to in some way, whatever efforts I can make, but I don't know how to go about it.
I think it's what we're doing now, sharing our stories and our journeys, letting people know why it's so important to donate blood, why ethnically close match blood is so important because of the reactions that we have. I don't know if you know if anybody, have you yourself had any reactions to blood or?
I haven't, but I know several people that have. A friend that Calvin and I have in common that had really bad leg ulcers.
Oh, wow.
And normally,
reaction.
And they've had a reaction. So basically, part of the normal treatment for that to help the healing would be transfusions, and they can't have transfusions because they've had bad reactions in the past, and they've built up antibodies to such an extent that they feel as though they have to save transfusions for something that's literally life and death. Yes. So he just has these horrible ulcers that severely affect his quality of life. You know, and yes, if he had access to donors that were more suitable, then it's something that he wouldn't have had to endure. You know, and it's a terrible thing, because you're talking about something that's eaten down to the bone in some cases without trying to be too whatever about it. So you can imagine, you know, what that's like.
Because he's lost toes as well.
See, this is the thing.
Yeah, and the fact that his ulcers have lasted, I think, good 12, 13 years maybe. because mine lasted nearly 10 years. And it was the fact that I had regular transfusions that helped that healing process as long as it lasted. And he unfortunately can't have that because of not being able to get better ethnically matched blood for him to be able to have that, because he built up antibodies in the past where the blood wasn't an absolute perfect match, wasn't a good enough match. So, and that's causing problems now. And people don't see that, the fact that there is a knock-on effect. You know, it's not just the fact that where you think, oh, you're going to skip a couple exchanges. No, if you don't have correctly ethnically matched blood and you don't have the correct donor, if you have a severe enough reaction, that's, you know, that it affects your life in a big way. And like Tony said, you know, he's got ulcers that have consumed his life, where, you know, he's at home, trapped at home all the time, wheelchair bound, and in excruciating pain because of it.
So going back to what I was saying earlier, RO blood type, what's so important about that, Calvin?
Well, RO blood type, where all plus blood types, so O positive, B positive, A positive, are RO blood types, can be RO blood types. And the reason why it's important, especially people who have sickle cell, is that the blood that we receive is RO positive, is RO subtype, is an RO blood. And it's the type of blood that they give us in particular, and it's a bit more beneficial to us in helping us to ourselves to not sickle as much and to retain their shape. Because with sickle, it's called sickle cell because your shape's misshape, and they don't hold their oxygen. So when we have an exchange, they give us RO blood. But the problem is that the fact that it also has to be ethnically matched, but because not enough people are coming forward from the right ethnic background and who are positive, so whether O positive, A positive, B positive, AB positive, so we're not getting enough RO matched blood. So if you would have blood, it may not be all matched blood, or in some cases, it's happened to me for a large part of this year, you don't have enough blood. So where I would be getting 10 units each time, I've only been getting half that, sometimes 4 or 5, which has then a knock-on effect on how I feel and lots of things. So RO blood is extremely important, and it's more prevalent in Black community. And it's not just in Black community, but anybody with a plus, so O positive blood group. But because the blood is have to be ethnically matched, it's very important within the Black community that people of those blood groups are the ones that come forward and say, okay, I'll donate and I'll keep donating. And that's basically why it's so important, because that's the blood that they will give people with sickle cell when they have transfusions. A question: do you think that there is a conscious or unconscious bias in attitudes towards blood donation within the Black community? Having said all what we said.
You know what? Yes, but I guess would be, and obviously this is just based on my personal experience. So, I mean, firstly, there are certain religious groups that feel, you know, it's not something you're supposed to do at all. So there is nothing really you can do to persuade them to do it. There are some that are more on the fence. And basically you have this situation where, okay, without going to, now you need to remember, I went to a religious school when I was younger, okay? Right. So I don't want to start busting scripture too much, but I'll say that if you look, basically they're relying on a reading of the Bible where you look at Leviticus 17, 10 to 4, okay? And essentially, this was something written to discourage the Israelites from following the practices of their neighbors, because, you know, obviously the belief then was that these were idolaters or they were worshipping demons or whatever. So they had this belief that if you drank the blood of like a bear, for example, then you would gain the strength of a bear. right? So they wrote these laws partly to tell you, no, listen, we don't want you drinking bear blood or doing any of these things. But now, obviously, people have applied it to things like transfusions.
Yeah.
And it's very hard then for people who are outside that world of people who are, very staunch, whether evangelicals, all these little subsects of that, to then talk to them in a way that sort of persuades them, because how many NHS staff, for example, are what in that world we kind of call Bible literate. There's not that many, so you're not able to sort of talk about James 5 and our duty towards healing each other and so on, whereas this is something that I've seen in the past has helped people to donate blood. And then Davina quite rightly said, leaving aside the religious reasons, which apply to Christians and Muslims, and I mean, to be honest, that almost any religion you can think of, there's a group of those people who believe the opposite of other groups.
Yeah.
And unless you're familiar with all of them, there isn't really any way to persuade them to donate. So if we're not talking about them, then there are people that are disengaged. I know this because whilst I haven't been involved in the blood transfusion thing, I had been involved in politics to an extent.
Yeah.
And you're trying to raise people's awareness of certain political issues or this, that, and the other, and people aren't interested, and I can't say I blame them because, life is busy, life is hard. You're working, you're looking after your kids, you're doing this. So you don't want to be bothered at the moment because it's all you can do to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So there's that kind of disengagement. And then, as Davina rightly said, there's the lack of trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most pressing one, because those are people that you could convince. And I believe if they were aware of the good it would do for such a small cost, they would do it. But there's this barrier because their experience with government has been negative.
Yeah.
And then the things that they know about, I mean, I've had somebody talking to me about, the Tuskegee experiments.
Yeah.
Okay. And this kind of mistrust, or somebody else talking about pharmaceutical companies testing medications in Africa.
Yeah.
In Haiti and so on. And so they're sort of like, you know what, nobody's putting needles in my arm because I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And on one hand, you want to say it's paranoia, and then you think, no, wait, hold on. These things did happen.
Yeah.
And those people did trust those institutes because, this is a doctor and so on. And then something really terrible came out of it. So how do we overcome that? And I'm not, but yeah. Sorry?
By doing what we do, by doing what we're doing,
Yes.
where they can see the people that they're affecting. Because like you said, normally it's someone that they have a level of mistrust about, or an organization that's saying to them that they should be doing this thing. And so when someone approaches me, if I'm trying to sign up blood donors, and they say to me, who does the blood go to? And I say, to me. I'm honest, and I tell them who I am, what I have, and I say it's going directly to someone like me, and millions of people like me, and you're keeping me here and alive, and I wouldn't be talking to you if someone like you didn't donate. So, like you said, both said there is a mistrust, and I think we shouldn't give up on trying, because that's not an option. It's definitely not an option for blood and organs. So we need to find a way for them to engage with us, more people like us, and the people who are recipients of the blood and organs that we're asking them to donate, and say, okay, look, this is evidence of your good deed and what you're doing and how it's helping.
Yeah.
rather than someone who's a scientist who is not affected by it in any way, saying to them, you should do this.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Because I know that if it weren't, and I know we were saying this before, but I should stress, so I have a daughter, I have a wife. My daughter would not exist if it wasn't for the people who gave blood. I wouldn't be here if not for the people who gave blood. Because in addition to the sickle cell, I've also had cancer. Do you know what I mean? This is a thing where my daughter would have lost her father at the age of 2.
Yeah.
If you know, so I obviously it's something I feel really strongly about, in the sense of, yes, trying to get people to do it, but as you said, trying to get them to see the faces behind this thing, because you know they sit in a room somewhere. There's actually a centre very near my walking distance from my house, and you know I see the people going in there, and obviously they don't know that they're the people who've kept me here with my family. Yeah. So I guess you're right. It's such a big thing, because like you said, I've had this conversation, not in the kind of detail you have or anything, but although I do stress the fact that people, this is something that does help people, there is still that weight. It's almost like you have to shift that weight out of the way before you can get to the important thing of telling them. First, you have to break down that barrier of mistrust that has built up over time. I guess.
Being an African man from Nigeria and your wife being culturally from the Caribbean, do you believe, or is there a difference between African and Caribbean giving and donating blood?
You know what? I would. So I reckon there is.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no. I do think there is, because you know when I'm talking about the distrust of government, for example, and let me put it this way: if you're from Africa, your experience of government is not necessarily a good thing. Do you see what I mean? There's all kinds of dishonesty and so on with government institutions, and regardless of what the people themselves are like, the governments are invariably terrible. So if that's been your experience of officialdom, how are you going to trust government?
Yeah.
You know, you're used to listen. Some of the best speakers I have ever heard in my life, people who, you know, by the time they finish talking, you would be willing to run into traffic for this man. and then you find out all lies. You know what I mean? So how are you going to trust institutions and systems and all these things when that's been your experience? Because you feel foolish, firstly, and then you know you're like, well, you're not going to get me like that again. No.
Yeah.
And that's it. And whatever anyone tells you, because I know that for a great deal of my life, I was cynical. And cynicism is not a good thing, but I was a very cynical man. People would tell me things, I'd be like, yeah, okay, you carry on. And that would be that. I wouldn't engage with it at all.
Yeah.
So breaking that down, I keep using that thing, but breaking that down this is why what you're doing is very, very important, because at least, you know, people are able to see from beginning to end that, no, look, this is something that you can verify yourself. I mean, I'm standing in front of you, I'm flesh and blood, and this is how this has helped me in the past. This is how it will continue to help me and people like me. And I guess the more of that they see, then the better. Because at least in my experience, now I'm not a Caribbean man, so I can't, but I have not found quite that deep level of cynicism in the Caribbean community towards government and its institutions. This is not to wait. This is not. Hey.
Calvin, what are you Caribbean man here? Hey.
Right. Okay.
I wouldn't say that was in my household.
Yeah. It's true, actually. Let me not talk for the Caribbean. I'm not
When we're trusted.
Because I guarantee you, both me and Davinia could tell you, could point out Caribbean, with Jamaican origin, and whew, some of the actions where the same as you said, where government is good, and they have some very fixed views on things.
Yes.
Blood just being one of them.
Yeah. My mum actually prays over my blood before I receive it.
There you go.
Praise
so
as well. So.
It's not unusual. But yeah, so like I said, the Caribbean, like I said, especially if you come from certain countries in the Caribbean, where, like I said, Davinia said, your mum prays over the blood and
Jamaicans,
Oh God, I can't even think about the number of times where I've been in the hospital and my mum's come there, especially if she comes with her friends and the Bibles come out.
Yes.
Oh, don't do this here. and I'm lying there, and the nurses look at me like, and I'm like, okay.
No, but the difference there, because I was never able to open my mouth to say anything. The pastor comes.
That's what I'm saying.
Because I'm reduced to being a child once again. Do you know what I'm like? You can't argue with the pastor. You can't.
Like you said, it's this thing on religion. I remember years ago, my mom had a friend who I've never seen anybody. I mean, I was brought up in a Catholic church, and seen some huge Bibles, and I've never seen anybody walk around with a Bible that big. Okay, that you needed a shopping trolley. Wow. And she turned up at the hospital one day. Do you know the table that they put on the end of your bed? And she just plonked this huge thing on the end of the bed, and on the wall just began praying, and it was like, okay,
with olive oil.
What are you doing? I'm like, what are you doing?
I have olive oil, but the cross on your forehead.
I'm thinking, I've not got enough problems at the moment. You're doing this to me. I'm like, why? So the attitude, like you said, it runs through our communities where, where certain attitudes and not just religion, just the fact, like I said, people have particular beliefs, and it's not easy to shift those beliefs, but because it's like family and friends, like we've said, where I don't know how many of your family and friends you've ever asked whether or not they donate, because I, up until recently, didn't think of it and didn't think, so, okay, never actually crossed my mind to ask, and I did. I'd asked them, and I was very surprised at the answer. I won't say it on here, but I was taken aback by the answer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if any of you have had that same sort of conversation.
No, sorry, after you.
It's trust. You do ask, and sharing my experience with going through kidney failure the first time round and second time, I've had people actually sign up and donate blood, especially being part of B Positive Choir. But again, it's just, there's a lot of excuses as well. Either they have tattoos, they've traveled. So you get many of those excuses, but again, it's the conversation is there, and I think you share a post, but people, I think, want you to probably just forget, kind of in a sense. You'll ask them and they'll be like, yeah, I've signed up. But the conversation, you'll have to press, and it's just like you feel like you're bothering somebody for them to donate blood. So I share it on social media. I share my story. If you're kind enough to go and donate, then I leave it. But I pressing people, I find it's too much. You get emotional over it because people see the pain you go through. So for them to ignore that, it is very hard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wait,
yeah. No. So you know what's funny? It didn't occur to me most of the time, and then I realized that, hold on, at least ethnically, I'm an African man, even if I wasn't born in Africa, and most of my family are basically African. A lot of my friends are basically African. And then there are all these rules. For example, well, if you've been physically intimate with somebody from Africa, then you can't give blood. I mean, okay, so who does that leave? Do you know what I mean? It's like this thing that. Yeah. So a lot of them are just like, well, yeah, I would have, but
I help you.
Yeah. That's I mean, like where the excuses, like being said, where we go for in the Be Positive Quiet, and you have people come to say, I'm so proud of you. And I'm thinking, great, you donated blood.
Yeah.
And it's just like the comment.
I watched you on TV. Have you donated blood?
And then I'm thinking, did I swear at somebody? Did I say something offensive? And like you said, but you don't, you just think you do, especially if people see what you go through.
Yeah.
yes.
Then you think to yourself, okay, I shouldn't have to ask. I shouldn't
Yeah.
need to ask. You
Yeah.
know, but yeah, you do.
And the funny thing is, the two people that I mentioned who do give and gave regularly, I didn't ask them. They didn't even know me when they started. They just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it's one of those things, you know, people either they have the inclination and somebody else, because in each case though, somebody had persuaded them that it was a good thing to do, and they kept it in mind, and they kept doing it.
So we've got 3 minutes left, and the last 3 minutes. Is there anything any of you would like to say to people watching?
Wow.
In regards to ethnically matched blood and organs. Start you, Davina.
Stay opted in, please. And also, if you've joined, fantastic. Thank you very much. But do not opt out. You really will be helping somebody like me. You cannot take your organs with you.
No.
You a long life, but my thing is, if you be willing to accept an organ, then please be willing to donate.
Yes. Yeah.
You
yes. I would just say, you know, bear us in mind in the sense that not only is it helping us, but it also helps you. Nobody expects to have a situation where they're in an accident or they get cancer or they do whatever. If there's this reservoir out there, it's almost like insurance for you as an individual as well. If we have this culture going, if we have this situation where it's something that we do regularly, it helps our community as a whole. We all get upset when we see things about a little kid or, you know, or somebody like Davina who has this issue and there's no donors, you know, there are no ethnically appropriate donors. But then are we making the effort that we need to make sure they're safe and that we will be safe in the future? Do you see what I mean? Yeah.
It could be anyone. I mean, I was speaking to a nurse today who was a nurse for the COVID patients, and the amount of COVID patients that had renal failure and are actually on dialysis now, it's absolutely shocking. So anything can happen in your walk of life where you might be in my position. So just keep that in mind.
And that's the thing that people don't understand. It's not just us, it's anybody. And it could be a member of someone close to them that you don't know when you're going to need blood or an organ. You could be an accident, God forbid, or just become unwell. And and like the same as the NHS, it's there at the point of need. You can't go looking for it after you want it. You have to make sure it's there and there's a supply and there's a stock and that there are people that you can call on before. And people need to understand that. So thank you guys for doing this today. It's been amazing. We had a good conversation, good fun.
Thank you to those that joined us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for everyone that joined us and listened. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for the work you're doing.
It's a pleasure. It's
important.
And I managed to keep some of your secret under wraps, so it's cool. I was worried which stories I should tell. See, we spent a lot of time in the hospital, so you know it can go sideways really quickly.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Trying to be a respectable member of the community in middle age, but these secrets are out there.
Yeah. I know that respectability. Woo, middle age. There's a word I thought I'd never say. Actually, I'll give you a joke. Someone actually went to a local shop recently, and they thought I attended the local uni. Says to me, so you're back to uni, and I was like, excuse me.
I
I'm coming here every time to do my shopping.
Must be those jelly babies.
I told Marie, she said to me, what was wrong with you? Was he drunk? Was something wrong with him? Was he smoking something? I was like, no. He thought I went to the uni.